want you to turn your Bibles. We're going to look at the chapter 20, I believe it is. We're going to look at chapter 20 of the book of Genesis. Start there at 20. Have you ever heard someone say it's a half-truth? Let me tell you the definition of a half-truth, okay? It's a whole lie. Matter of fact, it's worse than even a lie in the sense because it has a little bit of merit behind it. It's a half-truth is something like rat poison. Because a rat won't eat straight poison. But if they mix it with corn and mix it with, then they will eat it. Tell the rat, hey, this is good food. It's only a half lie, right? So it's half true. But what happened to the rats? What happened to any of us when we tried to tell half truths? A lot of times I believe, and I say that because we're going to see a man, Abraham. We saw him, I think it was last week, when he told Pharaoh, this is my sister, right? He lied. We see where some people are going to say, well, he told it was a half-truth. We're going to see where he went on to tell in this story that he said, well, basically, she is my wife, but her father was also my father, but her mother was not my mother. So they was half brother, half sister. And somebody said, well, that's wrong. Well, it wasn't wrong back then. Matter of fact, you get to thinking about how could it have been wrong at the beginning. Adam and Eve, where they was the only two alive, and they had kids, both male and female. Who did they marry? They married their brothers and sisters, right? Even we're going to see that Isaac and others, they married their cousins because it was able to do that. We don't marry our cousins in most states in the Union. Some we can. You don't marry your sister and brother because of genetics. And genetics is what have happened since the creation of man. Man, God created Adam and Eve. How? What was their description? How was they physically? How was they genetically? They was what? Huh? They was good. They was perfect. They didn't have a genetic default. We know today that this man, because of there's things that our food. It's been proven that our food is killing us. Even the insecticide and all the chemicals going now, they are. I know it sounds funny. Y'all may not have heard that. I bet you have at the university, where they are saying that the fertility rate among men has fell more than 7 or 10% in the last 40 years. What? It's falling. And they say it's because of what we have been eating. They said, oh, don't worry, because it won't affect, but it won't affect us. But at the rate it's going, in another 1,000 years, we won't be able to reproduce because of what has happened. Well, I say that because they could marry, and there wasn't any law against marrying close relation until a few hundred years after this. Finally, it came the time of Moses that God gave the law that you could not marry close relation. Your aunt, your uncles, your nieces, your nephews, your brothers and your sisters. Does that make sense? But it came about then. God have always been so much smarter than men. Like I've told you before, back before the first century, when they had pork and meat like that, they didn't have the way to cook it like we do. They would boil it or cook it. A lot of times. So it's funny that God did not allow men to eat pork. But the time that the New Testament came along, what had came along that they could cook in that they couldn't cook in before? The iron pot, the cast iron, and the pots. All of a sudden, it's funny how God allowed us to eat that food about the same time that there came an invention, a way that we could cook it to be safe. I think all of this is fantastic. Now, that's an introduction, but let's look at Abraham, what happened here. This is after Lot, after Melchizedek and all that we talked about last week. Verse 20, it says, and Abraham journeyed from there to the south, and drove between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gezer. Now, Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, and Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gezer, sent and took Sarah. Now, the thing about it is, this was somebody coming in. He was the king. He took her. Now, it wasn't the case that I think that he just went in and forced it and just, but that was a compliment when a king took somebody's sister into their house. That made them kin to the what? King. Matter of fact, you want to see later, why do you think we look at, and later some of you probably already know this, but Solomon, how many wives did he have? He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. The concubines, he took them because he liked the way they looked. But he took many of his wives he took because that was a way of showing respect. That's why he took from Pharaoh, one of the Egyptians, he took one of their daughters. Any land that you wanted to show friendship to, the king would marry what? One of their daughters. That was a way of showing a king showed friendship by taking a daughter or a sister into his house. To tell you how good a friend we are, I'm going to marry your daughter. I'm going to show you how much you can stay here. I'm going to marry your sister. That was a way. It wasn't something that I know we think of it, don't we? Kidnapping. We think of it as being some way of hurting them. But we have to realize back then that was a way of showing friendship and respect. He was showing friendship and respect to Abraham when he took his sister. Okay. Some of you have a hard time thinking like that. We do today, don't we? But really, that's what he was doing. He was showing respect to him. And it says, but notice, when God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man. Do what? Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Now, this is something that we learn about Abimelech. He knew who was talking to him at night. Now, Abraham knew about the Lord, but we know there was a man there in that country that also was a priest of the Most High God. But when the Lord talked to him, when God talked to him, what did he say? He said, Lord, will you? He knew who it was. Does it make sense? So he knew who it was that was talking to him. He didn't say in the dream, who are you? He said, Lord, will you do this? So he knew who it was. Did he? And he said, verse 5, did he not say to me, she is my sister? And even she herself said, he is my brother. So it wasn't something that just Abraham said, but it was something also that what? Sarah said also. Said, my brother, and says, in the inclination of my heart, or ignorant, basically, in the innocence of my hand, I have done this thing. He said, in my heart, I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. I didn't know it. He pled ignorance. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in ignorance, but it says of your heart, but I also withheld you from sinning against me because I did not let you touch her. Said, I know this, you did it ignorant. That's why I kept you. Somehow he had used his God had been in there and said, I have kept you from sinning. I'm the one reason why you hadn't consummated. Oh, consummated, but come on, say it somebody. Consummated. He had not consummated the wedding. And so he realized it, right? The wedding, and he said, now I kept you from going into her. I did it. And he knew, but the whole thing that still is so great to me is he knew who God was. Isn't that right, Mark? He knew who God was, didn't he? Yeah. Now, in this, it says, yes, I know this. It said, now therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know this, that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. And I don't think he's talking about just his wives and kids, but he's talking about the whole what? The whole nation. Because the whole nation was his. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and told all these things into their hearing, and the men was very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? How have I offended you? Abimelech said, how have I offended you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? Now, this is him calling it what? A great sin. He knew what a sin was. To take another man's wife was what kind of a sin? He said it was a great sin. He realized that. It says, you have done deeds to me that ought not to be done. You had done deeds to me. One, he had lied. The other, his wife had lied. The deeds had been done. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you had done these things? Why did you do it? What did you have in view? Why did you do it? That's what he was saying. And then Abimelech said, because I thought. The worst thing that can happen to a man is when he gets to thinking for himself about religion. I mean, honest.
Fearful words, I thought.
Huh?
Fearful words, I thought.
Because somebody said, I thought this was okay. And I always tell people, somebody says, I don't think you put enough thought in the right direction. Because he said, I thought. And then, because I thought surely the fear of the Lord is not in this place. And they will kill me on account of my wife. What? They did not know the fear of the Lord. Now, God's chosen, and a lot of people, and I would say this. One man we talked about, some men here in town. There's some men in town that are really fearful of God. Does that make sense? There's people that helped the church and did things for us, and the roof and everything else, that are not Christians. They are fearful from fear of God. They respect God. Now, we're trying to talk to them. How many of you believed in God and knew who God was before you allowed him to be your Lord and Savior? How many? Probably every one of us. Some of us for years, we knew who God was, and we feared him before we allowed him to be our what? Our Savior. here, this man knew who he was. It says, now therefore restore the man's wife. He said to do that. So Abimelech rose, did that. And then Abimelech called and said, what have you done to us? Now have I offended you that you may brought on me, on my kingdom, the deeds that ought not to be done? Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view? And Abraham said, because I thought surely the fear of the Lord is not in this place, and they will kill me account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister. But she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, whether we go, say of me, he is my brother. They had that planned out. Now we find out why they did it in Egypt, right? They did it here. When they left the home, when they left Haran and started down, they had started the journey. He said, now, if they asked you, tell them I'm... He was so...
He didn't trust God enough.
Yes, we think of Abraham as having a great man of God, but at first, he did leave his homeland.
Yeah.
But he didn't leave his family. He brought his nephew with him. Then we can see his nephew and him separated, and the promise was made that they was going to be blessed. But then again, we can see Abraham is a beautiful picture, probably of one thing. A man that started out with enough faith to take a step, but still had trouble obeying the Lord and trusting the Lord. And then he trusted a little more, took another step. And then he trusted and took another step. Abraham came the man that we're going to read about later, where he took his son. And he said, I thought even if I killed him, the Lord could raise him up from the dead. He ended up that much. Did he have that much faith to begin with? No. I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Do you have more faith today than you did when you was baptized? I say that's a loaded question because that's one thing we are to have. We are to grow in our faith and our knowledge. Abraham was God's chosen. He was God's prophet. Even before he got to where God knew he could be. I don't know a man that the first year or 2 years that he is a Christian can be a deacon or an elder. It just don't what? It just don't work that way. It takes growing process, right? It takes a growing process. And you see this, I think, so well in Abraham. And then it says this. Then, verse 14, then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, males, and female servants, and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah his wife to him. Abimelech said, see, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. Now, this showed a man that realized who God was. I would have been tempted to look at Abraham and said, your wife is back, here's all this. Now, would you leave my country? How many of you have been tempted to tell them to leave my country? But,
got me in trouble. Leave.
but you know the thing that I see that Abimelech believed what God said? Because God had told me, said, this man is my prophet. Right? And if you have a prophet of God living in your country, then God would probably also bless you for him living in what? In that country. He trusted in God. He understood what it was to have a prophet of God in his land, I believe. I see this man as having somebody that was of great trust in God. I think that's another reason. I think that David. I think that's another reason the Lord said you could get this land in 400 years because the sins of the Amorites are not yet full. Because we see some men, Melchizedek and Abimelech. We see some men that knew who the Lord was, and they hadn't got to the sin point that the Canaanites did in the next 400 years. And somebody said, "Well, how can a land change so much?" And well, because it can. We can see that happen if you go to some of the countries in Europe where 97% of the people used to go to worship God on a Sunday. And some of them that used to have 97%, some countries, now they have 2% that goes to worship God on Sunday. And that has all changed in the last 80 years. Country can what? Change from believing in God to not believing in God so easily. And then, where am I at? And then, so Abraham, dwell wherein it were you praised it. Then to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given your brothers 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vanquish you before all who are with you and before everyone." Thus she was rebuked. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, his female servants. Then they bore what? Children. For the time that they was there, we don't know how long they was there, there had been no children born. Why? Because God had sealed up and said, "No, you are not going to have." So this happened. For the Lord have closed up all the women of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. I think this is one of the greatest story of this. And then we can see what happened in 21. 21, we can see that after this happened, that Isaac is born. 21, Isaac. And then the Lord visited Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. So Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to himself, who Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah, he was how old? 100 years old when he was born to him. Now, well, you got to remember back then, there was people older than that he knew. Abraham, if you go back and look at the generation, he could have known and met when he was young, he could have met one of Moses' son. Not Moses, but Noah's son. Because they remember before the flood, they lived to be 800, 900 years old. God said after the flood, I'm going to put a time limit that you're going to live, the average life's going to be 120 years. But he didn't cut it off all at once. Every generation they went down in the ages that they was. Down to his grandfather, or his father was 200 years old, I think. His grandfather was about 400. So it slowly went down to what we call 120 years of age.
400.
Do what?
400?
Some of them, yes. His grandfather, I think his grandfather was 400 or 240 or something. I remember the 4 in there.
Their bodies must not have been the same as they are now.
Well, they wasn't, like I said, they wasn't polluted like ours did. It's a proven fact we are polluting our body. It'd be like, my daddy, they told my daddy when he was 30 years old, if you don't stop eating that, you don't stop drinking that, you don't stop smoking, you're going to wake up dead one morning. That's what they told him when he was 30. So my dad went home, smoked a cigarette, thought about it, took a drink and thought about it, and then kept eating fried food. But he lived to be an old man. He died at 48. That's what my daddy was, 48. He woke up one morning, had one cup of coffee, and fell over dead. 48 years old. Why? Because he would not change the poison that he was taking into his body. Does that make sense? Today we can see that how that happened, and it's something that we are doing now. It's so sin harmful to your body is a worse sin than what we think, because harming our bodies is something that we genetically and through our genes and through our offspring we pass down. If you feed it, we pass it down. If you eat wrong, your kids will probably do what? Eat wrong. And your grandkids will probably eat wrong. Matter of fact, you ask people that smoke, why do you smoke? And most of the time, one or both of their parents did what? You ask them why one or both of their parents smoked. Because that's just, we pass down those things. But anyway, and it says this, Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah said, God had made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. And she also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have what? Born him a son in his old age. So Sarah nursed a child. This happened, and I'm going to stop there. I don't want to get into the rest of this chapter, but we've taken longer than I thought we would on this. But I want us. This to me is some of the foundation. This is the foundation of the Bible we're talking about. Abraham. We can learn that sometimes people want to become, in 1 year or 2 years, they want to become something like this. It's like an older preacher told me this when I was in college, because I listened to my professors. I used to listen to Brother Charles Cole and listen to him preach. He was so eloquent. He could quote the Bible. He could just, Brother David Underwood, I could sit there and listen to him, and I just, and it was Brother Charles Cole told us, he said the story. He said one time there was an older preacher that preached, and a young preacher had just started, went up to him one night, and he looked at him and he said, Brother Jones, I would give my life to be able to preach like you. And the old preacher looked at him and said, son, you hadn't lived long enough. I gave my life to preach like this. You don't learn how to preach. You don't learn how to live as a Christian life. It's something that we get better at, and we practice, and we work towards being like Christ. Are you more like Christ today than you was last year? If you say no, then you need to strengthen up again because you're out of shape. You need to get in shape. Because sometimes, how many of you could, last year, a year and a half ago, my wife and I could go to the gym and we could push with our legs 400 pounds. But guess what? I don't think I could now. But I should be able to go back and get back up to doing that if that was important to does that make sense? The thing about it is, my muscles, to me, is not near as important as my spiritual muscles.
Amen.
And that's what we need to work towards. Abraham, a great picture. I'm taking time because he's a man that his faith built by steps. In 25 years, he had went a long ways, 25 years. But we're going to see him even going a little bit more. in the next 15 years to the top of that mountain. When he took that knife and was about to plunge it into his son, having faith that God could raise him back, because he had promised that through him, his seed would multiply, right? Great story.